I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement. My name is Paulina O'Kieffe Anthony. I am mixed Afro-diasporic descent and the daughter of immigrant settlers who have come to this land. I was born and raised in Takaranto, which is located on the unceded territory of many indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee, Ojibwe, Wendat, Chippewa, and Mississaugas of the New Credit, under the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Treaty. But I'm very excited to be with you today. I'm speaking from Windsor, which is actually located on the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations, comprised of the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi peoples. It is important that we acknowledge these territories, always to remind us that the ownership of this land does not sit with us. Thank you to the Indigenous peoples of this land for stewarding it in such a way that we can all gather from it what we need, so that we can all gather here today to be able to do this great work with one another. And as I get my presentation ready, I invite you to also think about the traditional territories that you are coming from, wherever that may be. Okay, so let's get started. As I said, my name is Paulina O'Kieffe Anthony. I go by she, her pronouns. You can find me on Instagram at Paulina O'Kieffe or on my website at paulinaokieffe.com if you have any follow-up questions. If there are questions throughout this presentation, feel free to put them in the chat and we can take them up closer to the end of the session. I will go back through the chat for your questions. But other than that, I'm going to get through the presentation as is. So a little bit of an overview. We're going to go through building out our project ideas. We won't do introductions and warm-ups because there's 130 of you on here. That would take forever. We will be building out our project idea, where to find funding, if you're eligible for a grant, what's in a grant, going through narratives, work plans, and budgets, evaluation, support materials, a little bit from the juror perspective, and then best practices for grant writing. Again, if there are any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat and we will get to them. Okay, so first and foremost, when I teach grant writing, I have been doing grant writing for a very long time, almost 20 years. And I would say that in my experience around grant writing, really it comes down to kind of how do you build out your project idea and how clear are you about what you want to do, who you want to serve, and how it's going to impact them. So some of the questions that I often ask people to kind of write down before you even get started, before you talk to a grant writer, before you attempt to even find funding, is to kind of develop out your project idea. So what is your program or project idea exactly? Who is it going to serve? Where are you going to do it? When will it take place? Why is the project or program that you're proposing, why is it needed, either for yourself or for your community? And how are you going to carry out this project? How much will it cost? And then who is on your team? These are really key pieces to figure out before you even go looking for funding, because it will help you to organize and understand what kind of funds are available to you and where you're eligible or not eligible to be funded for. So I want to take a little bit of time because I love to get people to get started on this piece around building your idea and skeleton. I'm going to ask you to answer some of these questions on your own. We're going to take maybe like 5 to 7 minutes. Just jot down point form if you have a project idea, and then answering some of these questions about your project idea. I'm going to see if this is going to work in the chat. Oh. No, it's not. Okay, so we can take a little bit of time. If you're on your computer, just on your notepad or on a Google Doc, or a Word doc, just kind of jot down the answers point form to this section. That way, by the time you come out of this workshop, you already have a start to building your kind of project or program idea. Also, I just want to take some time to apologize in advance. There is a lot of construction around my house, so it might get a little bit loud. I'm muted. I'll give it a few more minutes for folks to jot down their points. You guys can make sure you're muted. That would be great. Some folks are popping in their ideas in the chat, which are really great ideas that I've seen so far. If you just joined the session, what we're doing is looking at building the foundation of our idea. So I've asked folks to kind of take some time to answer these questions for themselves in point form, just to get started on kind of building your project or program idea. Yeah, so if you want to just take some time to jot down some notes, that would be great. And if you don't know all the answers, like you don't know how much it's going to cost, or you don't know where it's going to take place yet, you can skip those for now. Just answer what you can. Some really great ideas in the chat. It's a really great group. Okay, I'm going to give it one more minute and then we're going to keep moving forward. So we got a lot of folks joining us. Awesome. Okay, so I hope that you all have taken a little bit of time to kind of flesh out your ideas and the basic premise of those ideas, because you'll see how important that is as we go through the workshop. Okay, so now that you have your idea and some information about your idea, we want to look at where to find funding. Once you kind of want to start researching funders, there's a few things that you should consider when you're doing that. So when looking for funders, you want to start, I always start with like a general Google search, but I always add keywords that connect back to my project or demographic that I'm trying to fund, right? So if I'm trying to fund Black youth education, for example, I'm going to write that in, funding Black youth education. If I'm looking for funding sports adults or funding sports seniors, I'm putting those in for the Google search. I also try to look for geography as well, because it helps to narrow down first what's available in your immediate area, right? So whether that be Toronto, whether that be Ontario, whether that be Canada, the US, particular states, put that in as well. and it'll help to narrow your search and get you started. When you do look at grants that pop up from your search, you want to make sure and also pay attention to the eligibilities and make sure the grant actually funds what you want to do. Just because they're funding one, like you may be eligible in one area, but your project itself might not be, or parts of your project might not be eligible for that funding. So you want to read that eligibility really quickly, carefully, sorry. If you're not sure, you can always contact the granting officer and manager, which I suggest that you do. It's always great to introduce yourself so that they know you, so that they know your project, so that you can like walk through the project with that granting officer, and they are the ones who can really tell you whether you're eligible or not, or how to kind of maneuver your project idea. So I know that there are folks from all over, so that's what I'm seeing. So the majority of my examples are from Toronto or Ontario, but it's the same, it's similar in other places as well. So where to find funding? Government agencies are number one in terms of like finding funding. So if you're an artist or an arts organization or want to run an art space type of program or project, the arts councils are good for that. The Toronto Arts Council, Ontario Arts Council, Canada Council for the Arts are all great. Ministries and departments like Canadian Heritage or ministries for youth, for child and youth services. So look at the ministries, they often have really specific granting programs for very specific things. And you might find that what your project or program is connects to something that they put out a granting program for. So check out the different ministries for that. And then you have government foundations like Ontario Trillium Foundation. So you can look at those as well. Then you have foundations and public funding bodies. So you have funders like Laidlaw, you have public funders like Artreach, you have closed funders that are like more private kind of foundations. So you might need to be asked to, you might need to submit, a letter of intent and then be invited to apply. Or micro grantors like Q or Neighborhood Arts Network, which are like smaller $1,500 to $1,000 kind of grants. Of course, there are corporate funders like banks, Starbucks, TELUS. Almost all corporate entities have a corporate social responsibility kind of section of their corporation. So they're often funding, programs or projects that are close to their mandate or something that they've deemed is important to them. So pay attention to what they have on their website in terms of what they're kind of focused on, and see where you can align, because they will work to find folks who are aligned with what they want to kind of align with. And then there are grants for creative enterprise for anybody who's into that. Through the Government of Canada, Ontario government, there's some startup funding, there's City of Toronto startup funding, and then other resources for entrepreneurs. There's also private funding. So for example, if you're an artist, local businesses will pay to display your artwork or commission your works for their facility. There's also some angel investors who are people who are willing to invest their money into your business to make a return or project. So there are a number of ways to fund your creative project or program. You can also find websites and portals that list a number of databases of different grants. Some are free and some have a monthly membership fee. Some good ones that I use are Charity Village. Artreach has a really great database for grants. Grant Connect, which you do have to pay for, although there is a very specific partnership with the Toronto Library. So if you have a library card at some of their locations, you can access Grant Connect. And then there's an angel investors list if you're interested in that. But there are a number of different folks put out different newsletters, have different portals that find and group funders together. And that might be an easier way to find where you can access your funding. Okay, so once you have found funding, again, You want to look at your project idea, and the next step is to assess which grants. So you have a number of grants that you found. Which of those are you and your project eligible for? And make sure that both you and your project are eligible. Your project might be eligible, but you might be outside of the age gap, for example. Or you might be perfect for who they're looking for, but your project is not eligible under the guidelines of what they fund. So you got to make sure you or your group and the project are both eligible for funding. You want to be sure to read the grant eligibility criteria carefully, again, and if in doubt, always ask the granting officer and make sure that you go through that with them. They should be your best friend. Once you've determined that you're eligible, your project's eligible, you found some funding that you're looking to apply for, the first and foremost thing is you want to get your stuff together at the beginning, right? If you're an artist, that would, or entrepreneur, that's including your artist CV / like resume, yours and other artists you're working with on your project, a portfolio of your work and other community projects you've done, support letters and testimonials, if you're a business, like social entrepreneur, your business package, and then any sections of your grant that need signatories early. If you're an organization or collective of folks, you might want to get audited financial statements or some kind of financial statements prepared, a board of directors list or a steering committee list, artist CVs of artists you're working with, or resumes of the folks who are going to be part of your project. Putting together like your mission, mandate, and organizational history will be really important. Support letters and testimonials from community, any sections of your grant that need signatories early. And then for any of you who are organizations that are applying for operating grants from any of the arts councils, you'll need to review and sign up for CADC in particular instances if you're applying for, or if your budget is more than a certain amount, right? So organizations applying for operating grants of $10,000 or less with revenues under 100,000 must submit an unaudited financial statement, or if available, review engagement report or audited financial statement. And that would be prepared using the CADC accounting template. So CADC is a really specific thing. And again, this is only for operating grants if that's what you're into or looking for. So remember to put all these things together. What I usually do is I put them in one folder so that I can easily grab them when I need them to attach a supplementary material to my grant at the end. This could also include things like photos of the work that you've done as well. So documentation, any evaluation you've done. If it's not a new project, if it's a project you've done before and you've had some really good success with it, capturing that success and kind of talking about it, the project, is also stuff you want to get together as well. Just a quick note that often folks leave this kind of stuff to the last minute, and that leaves them scrambling and kind of rushing around, and this can cause you to miss a deadline or submit incomplete applications, which is why I stress that you should get it done at the beginning of the process. All right, so we're going to talk about grant narratives now. So now that you have all your stuff together, you've found the grant that you want to apply for. Most grants have very similar common sections of a narrative that you're going to need to fill out. And those can include the background and history of who you are, or who your collective is, or who your organization is, a project description, which you should have because you've done that answering at the beginning of this section, the need for the project. So why is this project needed in your community, by yourself, etc., by your collective, by your organization? What's the need for it? The impact of the project is going to be huge. So that section is really going to be about what is your project going to do to impact your community or the demographic that you are claiming that you're going to serve. Sometimes there'll be some stuff around outreach and audience development, right? Especially if it's an arts grant, audience development will be big. Outreach might be big for arts and non-arts grants. So what's your outreach plan? How do you plan to get the word out? How do you plan to recruit folks into your program? there might be some stuff around operational things. And again, those are more in the larger operating grants. And then community connections. So oftentimes folks will just kind of ask like how you're connected to particular communities, especially if you say that your project or program is going to be supporting a particular community of folks, whether that be Indigenous folks, Black folks, people of color, the queer community. What are your connections? Who are the partners that you already have connected to that to ensure the project is going to be a success and is something the community kind of wants or is connected to already. So let's go through those grant narratives together. Okay, so in some instances, if you are a collective or if you are an organization, a grassroots group, it's good to have a section of your vision, mission, and mandate. So a vision, for those of you who don't know, is kind of like a larger overarching goal you're trying to contribute to meeting, right? So it can be very high in the sky, but you're working towards that goal, like kind of ending world hunger, right? Your individual organization might not ever end world hunger, but you're working towards that vision. A mission is more of a targeted goal you're trying to meet, which feeds into that vision. And then the mandate is kind of the way in which you attain your mission. So how does your organization or group do that work? So having that prepared is really great. Oftentimes, some grants will ask you what's your vision, mission, or mandate, or all three. Most grants are going to ask you about your background. So that could be a brief history of yourself, your organization, your business, your collective, your grassroots group, whatever. You should probably include kind of like the year you or the collective or organization started, why and how it was formed, or you started, what's its purpose? What did you see that was missing that you decided that this group needed to start? What programs or projects or products have you done to date? So if you've done work in the community already, what is that work? Any milestones or awards or notable achievements for that work for your organization? And if it's an arts organization, what the artistic direction and if there have been any changes over the years. This is for artists. And then for collective, explain again why the collective was formed and its artistic direction and purpose within community. If it's an arts collective, or if it's not an arts collective, then just its purpose within the community. So this section is key and you'll find it on most grants, including Laidlaw's grants. The next section is some grants will ask you who is part of your project. So I know in a lot of arts grants they do this. In other grants they'll ask you who are like key members of your organization or your group. So you want to be ready to include information about key persons who are part of your project or organization. So their titles, their roles, their bios. Key persons who are not part of your project or organization, but they are key to your project successes. You can list your board of directors or a steering committee if that's what you have. If there's any kind of governance committee that's kind of managing the project or organizing the project. Volunteers, if you have volunteers and how they impact the project. And of course, list other stakeholders who are part of the project. That can include partners. It can include the demographic of that you're trying to serve. So just really giving a good picture of who is actually part of this project and as much information as you can about those folks and kind of how they're going to contribute to that project is always good, especially when asked. The next section is just describing your project. So again, you have done that a little bit in the building your idea. And so you're going to just build out that idea a little bit more. So when you're describing your project, you want to include kind of like what will happen in your project or program and how it will happen. So those two things are really important. It's not just about what you're going to do, is how you're going to do it. So the funders can see if it's feasible in the way that you want to do your program. How will it benefit the community or customer if it's an entrepreneurship? How will it benefit other artists or organizations or other folks who are connected to the project? So both locally and nationally, maybe. How does the project feed back into your organization or collective's vision, mission, or mandate? So is the project connected to the things you said that you are passionate, or your organization wants to kind of fulfill in their mission, mandate, or vision? And then in what spaces is your project going to take place? So where are you going to do it? For any grants that are asking around about our outreach and audience development, you want to definitely include how you're going to market and advertise your project or product or program. So what are you going to use to get the word out there, to gain participants, to engage the larger community? If part of your project has kind of a final event or something that you want the community to attend. So what's the marketing you're going to have to put together? How will you develop your audience? And then who will be your project partners and how do they fit within the project? So if you do have partners who can help with outreach, so say you have a program and then you partner with a larger kind of community health organization, talk about that partnership and talk about how they're going to help you get the numbers that you want or need for your project or program. Okay, so that was grant narratives. So those are the most common things you're going to find in grant narratives. Outside of that, I would also say that a lot of grants are also now collecting a lot of demographic stats, and I would suggest you fill them out if they're optional. So just kind of a little bit more information about your group or yourself in terms of like background, racial background, ability background, cultural background, those types of things that folks are collecting as well. So be prepared to kind of speak to that. And in some instances, be prepared to, again, speak to your connection to particular communities if the project or program that you're kind of applying for is specific to those kind of communities. So what are your connections already to those communities? Who are your partners within those communities? Getting partnership letters from those communities as well, all work to strengthen the application to funders because they know that you're already connected and there's a larger kind of rate of success for your program there. Also, in some instances with grants, you will find that some funders ask for work plans, and those work plans can be very time consuming sometimes. They can come in template form, or sometimes funders will just ask you to kind of lay out how you're going to do the work, and there's no template. So I would just say give yourself time, especially if there is a template, to fill that out. Insert as much detail as possible and kind of break down your activities. You want to give a good picture of exactly how this project's going to work out and what program is going to work out and roll out, how it's going to develop, how it's going to roll out, and then how it's going to wrap up. Those are the three things I kind of focus on when I'm working a work plan. You want to make sure to include, like I said, pre and post activities. So that would include stuff like recruiting for your program, and then at the end, getting feedback or evaluating your program. Those are all part of the work plan as well. Common sections of work plans include goals, objectives, activities, timelines, responsibilities, or the key person who's involved, and resources. Not all work plans are going to have these sections in this exact way, but you want to make sure that you kind of are able to answer any of these if they do come up on a template. If there is no template, then you want to definitely talk about your objectives, your activities, the timelines, and your resources and key person. Like these last ones, you definitely want to show your funder that you have a plan, that plan is organized, that here are the different activities we're going to need to do to figure this, to make this program happen within this time. Here are the key people and what they're going to do. And then if there's resources, these are the resources we're going to need for each section of the plan. So that's generally a really good way for you to think about how to apply for grants and work your work plan. The other thing is work plans are not just for funders. Work plans are really good for yourself. So if you do get funded by a funder, it's good to have a good work plan that you can go back to and with your team to say, this is kind of what we're going to be able to do, and this is what we thought we were going to be able to do, and how we're going to be able to do it so that it's organized. But let's go through some common work plan sections. So if your work plan is asking what your goals are, they usually mean like, what are the larger vision things you want to accomplish with the project? So something like build self-esteem in young people in Toronto. It's really broad, really big, but it's a goal, like a larger goal that you're kind of working towards. Then you break that down with your objectives. So it kind of describes what you want to do to help kind of reach towards your goal. So if your goal is to build self-esteem in young people in Toronto, maybe your objective is then to create weekly opportunities for learning and skills development for Toronto youth, right? And then some of your outcomes would be like Toronto youth attend 5 workshops and gain at least 1 new skill. So you have your objective of what you're going to do, which is create the weekly opportunities. And then there's going to be an outcome that Toronto youth are going to attend 5 of your workshops and gain 1 skill. And that all goes back to your goal, your larger goal of building self-esteem in young people in Toronto. So all of the things in a work plan need to be able to connect, like they all connect back to each other. The next section is on activities. So if you are going to kind of build this objective of creating these weekly opportunities for young people, then the activities are all the things that you're going to need to do to kind of complete that objective. So it could be support youth in developing a grant writing skill, for example, and then the actual activity is develop and run a grant writing workshop. That's your activity that you need to put together. So if you're developing and running a grant writing workshop, it goes back to one of the workshops that Toronto youth would attend and gain at least 1 skill, which is grant writing, which feeds into creating those weekly opportunities, which feeds back into building self-esteem for young people in Toronto. So as you can see, they all feed back into each other. Then what you want to do is list out your resources. So what are the resources you're going to need to get that activity done? If you are teaching a workshop on grant writing, then you need for a projector, laptop, space, food, bus tokens for your folks. So just really listing out all the resources you're going to need. This helps with the budgeting process, because then you have to budget for each activity that you're going to have to do. And you also will know for each section what it is that you're going to need to carry out that activity as well. So again, if you're referring back to the work plan after you've been funded, you'll have a sense of like what you need. And then finally, you want roles. So who is going to do what on your team? Each activity should have somebody assigned to it, right? Whether it's a project manager or like a project coordinator or a volunteer, you should know who's going to do what in your work plan. And those are like basically the common work plan sections. So you, again, if you don't have a template for your workshop, for your grant application, and you just go through these sections here, right? If you kind of list your goal and then list your objective, list some of your outcomes that come with the objective, name the activities you're going to need to do to make those things happen, list some of the resources that you're going to need, and then who's going to do what. It's a pretty good structure for building your own work plan. And you can create a template of your own that you can usually attach or upload with a grant application if it doesn't come with a template already. Okay, and then the last section second last section is around timelines. So what also happens is, and is good to put on your work plan, is timelines. So when will each activity happen? The more specific you can be, sometimes is better, but if you need to be vague because the timeline's going to happen way in advance and you're not really sure, that's okay too, right? So just putting down each activity's timeline. So if the activity is run a grant writing workshop, you might write, September 2017 or well, this is outdated, but 2020, too, right? Versus, or you can be more specific, and we're going to run a workshop between September 1st and September 30th, like with a specific date. But either way, it's good to put a timeline to your activity. So again, that you have that organized kind of time in which everything's supposed to happen. You can organize your selves in like, what's the first thing that you need to do, what's the second thing that you need to do, and make sure the activities are in order for the success of your project or program. And then finally, you have evaluation. So some work plans might ask you how you're going to evaluate your program, or there might be just a section in your grant application that asks you the same question. So you're going to want to offer the ways in which you're going to evaluate how you're going to know if your program is working or not, right? So you would list the ways that you're going to do that. Is that going to be by survey? Is that going to be by participant feedback, focus groups, your own observations? How are you going to evaluate the program? And how often are you going to evaluate? Are you going to evaluate at the beginning, middle, end, just at the end? Let your funders know what your ideas are. Okay, I'm going to take a moment and just answer some questions. Oh, and I'm sorry that I'm going a little bit too fast. If there are any questions, let me know in the chat. All right. I just want to know if we have any questions. Okay, so I have some questions about audience development. What do I mean by audience development? When we're talking about audience development, this is for folks who have projects in which you are engaging large communities or audience members. So if you're doing arts-based programming and you're planning to have a final exhibit or show, how are you going to develop your audience? How are you going to kind of decide who's like the audience that you want to reach out? How are you going to communicate with that audience? How are you going to engage them to come to the show? That's what I mean by audience development. So if you have a plan around how you're going to engage those folks, that's something you could add into your grant application. Can you explain more about operations? Carla, do you want to elaborate? Like, what do you mean when you want me to kind of explain more about operations, like operational grants? Just let me know in the chat. The question from Maribel, who exactly would be stakeholders other than grantors? A lot of folks can be stakeholders in your project. So that can be the community that you're connecting with. That could be elders, that could be key community leaders, that could be the actual young people or seniors or whoever your demographic you're trying to connect with. That could be businesses, that could be other organizations or partnerships. So when you have a project, there are multiple stakeholders who might be affected by your project or need to be part of your project for its success. So it's good to list who those folks are and how you are connected to them. I'm sorry, I'm missing so much in the chat. There we go. The work plan is kind of like, it's kind of like a business plan, but not as like in depth necessarily. It doesn't have to go as in depth as a business plan does, but it is a way for you to organize exactly how the project's going to kind of roll out. And it can be very simple or it can be very complex. It depends on the template of your funder. It also depends if there's no template, how complex you want to get in organizing that or kind of showing your funder that work plan. How much of a project should you show you have funding? I would say that you can if you're applying to a funder, that funder could be the only funder who's funding your project in some cases, and in some cases you can show that you've applied to multiple funders to fund the same project. It just depends on your particular situation. I think some funders understand that they might be the only funder for this project, right? If it's a smaller funder, it's a smaller project. And in some instances, some funders do want to see that you have other sources if their funds or their eligibility won't cover the whole project, then you'll have to show where you're going to get the rest of the money. Most grants want to see other sources of funding. Is there a sweet spot that shows that you are not solely relying on the funder, but still need the funder to have the project be successful? I think that you'd have to be able to show that in the budget for your program or project, that if the funder wasn't able to fund the program or project, that it would be kind of detrimental to the project moving forward. So I don't know if there's an actual sweet spot because it could just depend on the funders, but I would definitely say that if you are applying and show that you have other funders that you've applied for or have confirmed funds from, but it's not enough to push the project forward, like I think that's the sweet spot for showing funders that you're still relying on their funding to make the project be successful. Also, if there's any questions around, some funders will ask, if you don't get all the funds, what will you do, or how will this affect the project? So just talking about what the effect of that project or the reduction of that funds will have on the project, whether you have to reduce the scope of the project, whether you have to only do a part of the project, whether the project can't be done at all. I think those kinds of questions or answers to those questions will also help you tell the funder how much you actually rely on the funding or not. How necessary is a theory of change in a grant application, and does that fall under work plan or evaluation? Depending on it just depends on the application. Not everybody has or asks for a theory of change. I think a theory of change is really excellent in kind of having the organization understand kind of what it does, and some funders do ask for it, so you'll have to see if that's something that the funder you're applying for asks for it, but not everybody asks for a theory of change, and where it falls will determine where the funder asks for it. Whether I don't think it usually falls under a work plan, it often falls under evaluation or its own separate kind of category. Okay, in your slide, you said outreach and audience operations. What kind of operations are you referring to? I'm referring to just for larger organizations or even small ones, what are operating costs, right? So your overhead costs, your space, your rent, that type of stuff. Okay. And I'm going to take one more question and then we'll continue. What are the common mistakes which lead to rejection? We'll talk a little bit about that later towards the end. Okay, thank you everybody. Keep adding your questions to the chat and we'll keep getting to them. Okay, cool. I hope this helps whoever was asking for it to be larger screen. Thank you for noting that. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about a little bit is budgets. So budgets help to kind of outline how much resources you're going to need to run your program. You want to make sure you include all your costs in your budgets, including any tax on purchases. Make sure your budget is accurate and properly adds up, that income and expenses zero each other out. Make sure you only ask for things the funder will actually fund. Sometimes we might have an eligible project from a funder, but not every single piece of what we need in the project is fundable. So for example, if a funder is like, we don't fund salary, we just fund straight project costs, then you're not going to ask for salary costs in your budget from that funder. And then you want to make sure to break down the budget with as much detail as possible. I find that the less a jury has to question where you came up with this number, the better it is. Common budget categories that you might find is staffing expenses, programming expenses, administrative expenses, which can be overhead costs, capital costs. So you purchasing tangible things that once the project is done has to stay with you. So that could be building costs, that could be paint, that could be renovation costs, that could be stuff like laptops or cameras, things like that. Evaluation expenses, so if you're paying a third party to evaluate your programming, honorariums, rental expenses, etc. So these are all common budget kind of items. And then financial management plans. So like I already mentioned, funders sometimes will often ask you to provide a financial management plan. They won't call it that. It's a question that asks, like, if you don't get all the money or you don't get funded, what does that mean for the project? Or what can you do to kind of, if you only get some of the money, how will that affect the project? It's a really good question to have an answer for, because it also will help you determine yourself that if the project doesn't get funded, how are you going to carry on with the project if it's possible? And then how will the money be managed? The other thing is in-kind contributions. So any kind of contribution you're getting to the project that is not direct cash is an in-kind contribution. So this can be donations of resources, staff time, administration, equipment, meeting space, etc. Non-monetary contributions that would have actually been expenses if they were not provided to you by a partner or a donor. And they may be provided by your organization or your project's partners. So you could be providing it yourself as an organization or as a collective. So that could be staff time or volunteer time, for example, or equipment you already own that is going to be part of the project. Or let's say a local business offers you gift cards for food for your program or bus tokens for your program, for example, things like that. Those are all in-kind contributions and have a value to them that you'd want to show in your budget. And I feel like funders like to see this. So if you have it, it's good to mention, because again, it offsets the cost of your full project. All right. When we're talking about doing budgets and budget kind of structures, this is how I generally do my budgets. I like to show what I'm budgeting for. I like to show if I'm getting other sources for the budget. And then I ask at the end what I'm asking from that particular funder. So in this budget example, it's super, super basic and simple, but the principles are the same for non-basic budgets. If you look here for staffing, you have a project coordinator, 20 hours at $20 an hour at 20 hours a week times 6 weeks is $2,400. I don't have any other funding sources for that. So that's what I'm requesting from, let's say Laidlaw is the funder. So that's what I'm asking for. Transportation, I just put $300, but you could also break that down if you wanted to do like bus tokens per head and how much that costs. Food, let's say we do $50 a session times 6 sessions, it's 300. Program supplies, 1,000. You can also break this down if you have very specific program supplies that need to be broken down in any way. But if it's just like pencils and paper and stuff like that, it's good there. You can add that in brackets. Space rental, $166 a week times 6 weeks is $1,000, but I'm getting that in-kinded by a local gallery. So I like to show that here, so it shows the funder I don't need that funding from them. And then admin fees, this can be your overhead costs, this can be operational staff that are not like directly related to the project. We'll just say $500 if there's an admin fee. What you want to show then, here's your total project budget, let's say it's $5,500. The funding from other sources, which is just the $1,000 of local in-kind of gallery is there. And then what I'm asking from the funder is only $4,500. And then you see the funding from other sources plus what I ask from the funder equals the $5,500. Cool. All right, so I feel like we've gone through this for a little bit. I'm wondering if, Laidlaw folks, if we could take a 5-minute break just for folks to have a bio break and stretch. Is that okay?
Works for
Let
us.
me know in the chat. Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Great. All right, so we're going to take a little 5-minute break. I'll leave it on. Somebody wanted me to go to the previous slide. Is it this one, Carla, that you wanted me to go to? Okay, perfect. So I'll leave it here. We'll be back in 5 minutes. So feel free to stretch, take a little bio break, and then we'll start again. Okay, and we are back. All right, so we were talking about budgets. Are there any questions specifically about budgets? I do see some questions in the chat that I can kind of speak to. Okay, so in terms of which grants typically cover operations, it depends on the grant, to be honest. Like there are operating grants, which are very far and few between. However, you can, when you do your budget and you have administration, that's usually a line that funders will cover. Up to about 10%, and that could go towards your operations, whether that be operating staff, whether that be space, whether that be kind of utilities, those types of things. So it just depends on the funder and where they kind of put in an allowance for operations, unless it's an operational funder and you're just strictly applying for operating dollars. So I hope that answers your question on that. Can the applicant for the grant also be the project coordinator, or would that be considered a conflict of interest? No, the applicant for the grant can definitely be a project coordinator in most cases for funding, especially if you're small and getting off the ground. It's understood that the team is small and is still building, and so folks will have multiple roles. And in some cases, the applicant should be definitely part of the group who's running the project. If the grant is for kind services or for advisory services, is there conflict of interest in a grant writer writing the grant and completing the funded or in-kind service? I think I'm going to hopefully understand this. I don't think there's a conflict of interest if a grant writer is writing the grant for you or on behalf of you in terms of the organization. I'm not sure if you're asking if the grant writer is doing this as an in-kind service, but if that's the case, you could also include that as an in-kind service. Could you clarify a bit on what funding from other sources represents? So funding from other sources represents any money that you are receiving from another funder other than the funder that you're requesting the amount for. So if this amount requested from funder, if the funder is Laidlaw here on this last column, then the funding from other sources could be any other funding I get. That could be from, let's say, OTF, that could be from a private bank. So whatever combination of other sources that are giving me money, I would put here. So that's kind of where I show the funder that I'm applying to. So in this case, Laidlaw, that I have other funding for this project, other funders for this project that are covering specific lines, and we just need this funding from you to make this project happen. So that's what funding from other sources means. And then I would just name the source. So be it a bank, be it another funder. Let's just say I had this 2,400 from another bank, like TD, I would have put 2,400 here and then name TD, and then I wouldn't have asked for 2,400 from Laidlaw because we already had it. I am always concerned with the template. Doesn't matter if the funder doesn't provide it for you. Is there a place to find templates for formatting for grants? I usually just make the templates myself. So I think you're going to get a budget template at the end of this session with the other sources that we're giving out. It does, I would say it matters in terms of If the funder gives you a template, that you should fill it out in the way that they're asking you to fill it out. If there is no template, then no, it doesn't really matter as long as you can show the item, how much it's going to cost, and how much you're asking the funder for it. These other two columns I usually just put in because it's good for the funder to know if you have other sources, who are those sources and like what they're funding. But no, you can always make up your own templates, and you'll be getting a template today as well for the budget. Would funders be deterred from giving funding to an individual? Do they prefer or require it to be an organization? That depends on the funder. Some funders do not fund individuals, like it's not in the eligibility, or some funders do fund individuals, but only for particular programs. It just depends on the funder. So you'll have to look at the eligibility requirements and see if they'll fund an individual person. Some funders, like arts councils, for example, you have to be an individual artist. They're not going to fund a collective or an organization for a particular program grant. Whereas some of their other programs, they won't fund individual artists. They'll only fund collectives or organizations. So it's all in the eligibility criteria that will tell you whether you can get the funding as an organization or an individual. Okay, so I'm just going to move forward from the budget. This is again a template here that will be given to you at the end of this, and I would say you can use this to kind of budget out your budget for the project or programs that you want to do. So I want to talk a little bit about evaluation, because I think this is a really key piece for a lot of funding applications. They want to know how you're going to figure out if your program is working or whether it's successful. Evaluation plans are kind of really key to help funders understand how you're going to measure your program or your project successes. So in your plan, you want to make sure to include what you will be measuring and how it relates to the program. So you don't have to measure every single thing in your program. You might be looking at very specific things that relate back again to your mission, your goals, your objectives. So you want to be clear about what it is you'll be measuring and then how it relates back. What tools you're going to be using to measure your impact. So again, surveys, focus groups, like what are the tools you're going to be using to get that information? How often and when throughout the project you plan on measuring. So if you only plan on doing a final evaluation versus if you plan on checking in with folks throughout the program for evaluation. If you have any partners or third-party evaluators supporting the evaluation, so maybe you are not doing the evaluation or your group is not, you hire out a third-party evaluator who's going to come in and do all the focus groups and surveys and write up the evaluation report for you. So you just want to be clear about what who's going to be part of that. And then how will you share your findings? So how will you disseminate the information in the final report? Will it be with your community? Will it be with your stakeholders? Will it be with your program participants? And how will you share with your funders? I also often say, like, be creative about the way you can collect your information, and also be sure to get qualitative and quantitative information. So you want numbers, but you also want stories to go with those numbers. Those are the best types of evaluations to grab when you're then looking to use that evaluation to reapply to other funds later. So as I said, you can be very creative. So you can use surveys, you can use focus groups, social media hashtags are a creative way, one-on-one feedback interviews, video logs, testimonials. There's so many ways that you can collect evaluation, and you want to do so that in a way that connects to what it is you're measuring and how you want to grab that. The next thing is supplementary. Okay, actually, hold on before we do that, because we have a question. What does evaluation look like for individual artist projects, like for instance music? Okay, so evaluation for you might be a little bit different. It depends what kind of program you're running. So if you're an artist, a music artist, and you're running a community arts project, evaluation's a little easier because it's really about, what your participants learned from your project. But if you are an individual artist and it's your, project is just really about your own kind of musical journey, then the evaluation is really about you talking about the impact of what the project or past projects have done for your musical career. So if you started in a particular place, let's say you've received some funding before, and or you've run a project before, even if it was self-funded, you can talk about how that kind of impacted your career as a musical artist. And then in the new project, you can then talk about what you're going to measure in terms of the next level of where your career is going to go, kind of. So your evaluation is really about talking about impact on your musical career every time, because it's a little different than you being able to gather participant evaluation on how a program runs versus your own individual kind of impact. I hope that kind of answers your question. How do you evaluate a public art display? It's not in a museum, so we would not be able to check how many people viewed the display. There are different ways to kind of evaluate public art. You definitely have to be creative because, as you said, you're not in one place, so you can't, there's not somebody there clicking. If you have thank you, Laidlaw. There's a lot of great stuff out there around evaluation, but I would just say generally in terms of evaluating public art, you can be very creative with it. Again, you can do a hashtag campaign and have folks take photos or with the public art and then like capture that or like take photos or leave comments. You can do QR codes where folks can leave comments or interact, or when they hit the QR code, you can count how many people have hit that QR code. So there's different ways you can evaluate a public art display. It's just how creative do you want to get in terms of gathering the numbers yeah. Okay. I'm just going to go over supplementary material because this is a big part of most grants, and we kind of talked about it at the beginning, but I want to always bring it back. So funders definitely ask for additional materials to get more information about you and to make sure you're eligible for the funding that you're applying for. So for organizations, collectives, and groups, you want to get the following. If you're a nonprofit or charitable, you want to make sure you have your nonprofit incorporation papers or your charitable status papers. Some funders will ask for board meeting minutes if your board is required to kind of approve you going for that funding. So that's a lot with the operating grants, for example. A list of your board of directors or your steering committee, for sure. Financial statements or a financial audit, or at the very least, a current general operating budget. List of other current funding sources and uses, sometimes they ask, and that could be in your general operating budget. Biographies or resumes of key people, samples of artistic works, pictures, film clips, program evaluation, those types of things, and support letters. So those are just some of the things that you can gather together if you're an organization, collective, or group. For individuals, you want to look at getting stuff around if you have any partnerships with your project, you want to get partner letters or agreements, documentation of your past works or projects that you've done, portfolios, a list of other current funding sources and uses or past funding that you've received, biographies or resumes of key people. Again, especially if you're an artist CVs are really key. Samples of artistic works, samples of pictures, film clips, newspaper, media stuff, or just documentation of prior programs or projects that you've done, and then of course support letters. So these are all, again, really great, super strong supplementary material pieces that can help to just put your application over. The other thing I would say is like high quality, more and recent and relevant. So the highest quality stuff that you have in terms of documentation, as recent as you can, although sometimes you can go a little bit farther in the past to show you the longevity of your work, and then relevant to the project at hand, right, that you're applying for. Okay, I'm going into best practices when grant writing, and then I'd love to take some questions, as many questions as I can after that. So when I'm doing grant writing, some of my best practices are to give yourself time. Grants, especially if it's your first grant or if it's a large grant, can be extremely overwhelming. You want to give yourself time to go through each of the sections to understand what you need to answer, what you need to provide in supplementary material, etc. Start early and don't wait till the last minute, because that will again add stress. And also a lot of funders these days have a lot, like their grants through portals. And sometimes when you wait till the last minute and then try to submit, their portals crash, you could lose work, etc. So the earlier you can get your grant in, the better. So make sure if you need to register a profile on the funder's website, just do that right away. Even if you're not planning to apply right away, at least then that way you don't have to do it later. This is especially important for the arts councils because all of them have portals in which you need to kind of register a profile. Call the granting officer or manager and discuss your project. And if you have any questions, I cannot stress how important that is, because they will know the most information in respect to the program or project that you are trying to apply for, and can help navigate your application in the right direction. They can help you know what parts of your program or your project are eligible or ineligible. What will the jury kind of have a sense of what they're looking for. They're just there to answer a lot of questions because they deal with that particular grant all the time. So make sure you call, make sure if you have any questions, it's really good to get in touch with them because they'll be able to answer very, very specific questions that you might have. Gather your support materials as early as possible, as I already said, especially if you're asking people to write you letters of reference. This sometimes can take a while, so make sure you get those things early. Do your grant in chunks so it doesn't get too overwhelming. Again, this is for folks who are new to grant writing, or even if you're not new and you're writing large grants, it can get overwhelming quite quickly. So take your time, do them in pieces, make sure that the writing is cohesive across if you're doing in pieces, or do it with a team. If you have a team that can work together, get different folks to do different sections. Check for spelling and grammar. Some people don't think that's important, but I do. As a juror, as somebody who's been on the jury side, it interrupts my flow when I can't understand what somebody's trying to say, or a spelling stuff throws me off. So it's just good to check for your spelling and grammar. Sometimes it's good to use the language that the funder is using. So looking at keywords on their website, or if they produced any reports, so that the language in which you are trying to explain your project aligns with the same language as the funder. So it's kind of easier for them to kind of decipher what you're saying and how it connects back to what they kind of want to see produced, and how it connects back to their own larger goals, right? Because the funder is funding you because your project connects back to the types of things that they want to fund or do in the world and their larger goals. And so if you can connect it through language and connect it through kind of outcomes, it makes it better for you to potentially get the grant. Follow templates exactly as they've been provided if they provide templates, and answer all the questions. Don't leave anything blank. And don't repeat things unnecessarily. So sometimes questions can look like one question can look like another question, but there is a slight variation. So you want to give a slightly variated answer to that instead of just copy and pasting the same thing. Provide a detailed work plan if they ask you, and budget. So again, the more detailed, the better. Connect with potential sponsors, donors, and your partners early so you can include them on the grant. You know, if there's somebody you want to work with on your grant, don't just put their name in there without asking them. Sometimes I've seen people do that. And then all of a sudden they get the funds and their partner didn't know that they were part of the grant. So you want to connect with folks early. It's good for them to get you support letters or agreements. You want people to be on board with your project early, and that way you can include them in your grant, which strengthens the grant application itself because you have multiple stakeholders and partners listed. And then make sure to have good evidence when describing your project, why your project is needed. So need and impact are going to be a huge thing in any grant application. So if you have good evidence on why your project's needed or what kind of impact it's going to have on yourself, your audience, your community, any of that, that will help to strengthen your ability to actually get the grant. Okay. All right, so I'm gonna leave the floor open for questions now.